You ever go to a party and they try to warm you up to conversation with a bunch of people you don't know by hitting you with icebreaker questions? Those can be all right, I guess. I've heard some of those that are kind of fun and they do accomplish what they mean to accomplish. But most of the times, the questions they ask are way too personal and they get you into places that would make sense 2 or 3 hours into conversation or maybe weeks into friendship or years into friendship, not at the icebreaker part of the party. Now, one of them that always gets me whenever this one comes up, I just think it's awful. It's, what's your most embarrassing moment? What? Why on earth would I tell any of you that? Like even here, don't get me wrong. I really like you and I like hanging out with you and I've had great interactions with so many of you, but I'm not saying what the most embarrassing moments of my life are here. I'm not enshrining and immortalizing that in the history of the internet. Like, come on. Some stuff, even if it's ugly pearls, is still your pearls. And you just hang on to that stuff. It's okay to have a private part of your life. And it's also okay to want some of the most embarrassing moments of your life to just go away, to float downstream and be forgotten, to get dragged out to the middle of the ocean and just dumped in the deepest trench. I have a difficult time with that. I always think about the most cringeworthy, stupidest things I ever said and did right before I fall asleep every night. That's when they all come back to me. It's just bizarre. At some point, I need to get around to actually, metaphorically, throwing those into the deepest part of the ocean and just moving on with my life and forgiving myself for saying stupid things when I was in 9th grade. Come on, get over it. Now, the embarrassing stuff, it sticks with us. And probably if somebody were to ask you, like, well, what's your most embarrassing moment? You would picture something you're not telling anybody. And then you would picture something that is kind of your go-to answer for that. It's kind of funny and a little self-effacing, and you can tell people. If you're lucky, your most embarrassing moment doesn't happen in front of very many people. But if you're not lucky, it happens in front of absolutely everybody. I think of Mark Sanchez's butt fumble play when he was the quarterback for the New York Jets. He got confused on an American football play. He turned around to hand the ball off, and there was nobody there. And so he turned around to try to advance the ball forward, but he just ran face first into one of his teammates' buttocksies and then flopped down on the ground and fumbled, and it resulted in a touchdown for the other team. That's rough, man. And I don't know, maybe Mark Sanchez has things he's more embarrassed about, but that one happened in front of everybody, and everybody will remember it forever and ever. I think the more public a thing, the more embarrassing it is. And I also think the more a thing strikes at your identity, maybe what you're good at or known for, the more it provides ammunition to people who don't like you to criticize you and always bring back up that thing. The more it takes your pride and dignity and just dashes it against the rocks, the more painful that would be. And I think in Esther chapter 6, Haman is definitely having his most embarrassing day ever when he has to robe his enemy Mordecai the Jew and lead him around on horseback. And I just picture this scene and what it must have been like to get through it. And then I'm really intrigued by the little bit we learn about what both parties went and did after this parade was over. All right, Esther 6:11. We've read this a few times, but here we go again. So Haman got the robe and the horse. These are the king's robe and the king's horse. He robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the streets, proclaiming before him, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." Now, I've done a little math on this, and I've determined that this probably was not a quick parade. This probably was not a pain that passed rapidly for Haman, because the walled portion of the city of Susa during this era of the Achaemenid Empire is approximately 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. And it looks like there were about 10 significant streets within that walled 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer area that ran roughly north and south, and then about the same amount that ran roughly east and west, maybe minus part of the corner of the walled area where the palace compound would have been. So what that tells me is that if this was going to be a thorough parade meant to let everybody who lived inside the walls know what the deal was in terms of the king delighting to honor this Mordecai fellow, that means that it would have taken, if we just did the north and south routes, assuming about 30 minutes per kilometer being a proper parade pace, it would have taken, what does that come out to? 30 times 10 is 300 divided by 60. It's about 5 hours that we're looking at of Haman and Mordecai just having to have some real special bonding time together while Haman is obliged to shuffle through the poopy streets, chanting again and again how much the king delights to honor his mortal enemy, Mordecai. I wonder if they talked about things in between. I wonder if Mordecai made any snide little remarks. I mean, given what we've seen of his character, I don't think it would be above him to jab Haman a little bit. I wonder if Haman made any remarks like, don't get any big ideas. We both know what's going on here. Or if they just looked in opposite directions and one enjoyed the event and the other not enjoyed the event and they just interacted with the crowds. I mean, somebody's dressed up like the king, doing the full parade route, crisscross through the whole city for 5 hours. You got to think everybody's going to blow off work or find a minute to figure out what's going on, catch a glimpse of the king, get the scuttlebutt, find out what the deal is. Even if not for the entertainment part of it, but just from a self-serving, I want to climb the ladder and make myself known point of view, you would have to think that a ton of people from within the city of Susa would have wanted to run up and greet the person and introduce themselves to the person who the king delights to honor every time that conversation happened, or somebody had to come up and tell Mordecai how great he was. Haman just had to stand there and wait. I wonder if Mordecai was able to raise his hand and be like, oh, hold for a minute. Let's stay right here and talk to these people a little bit longer. I wonder if people understood why the king delighted to honor in Mordecai. I would say, well, the king wouldn't want to admit that Mordecai exposed an assassination plot, because that would be the kind of thing that might give people ideas. But going back to Esther chapter 1, we know that the king wasn't particularly bright about that kind of stuff and was just fine with announcing things that were to his detriment to vast sums of people. So maybe people are even coming up during this parade and being like, well, why does the king delight to honor in you? And maybe Mordecai was like, well, it's not really mine to say. I'm more the one on the royal horse getting the parade. But this nobleman here, it's his job to tell you that. Just please direct your questions here to this gentleman. Oh, okay, Mr. Whatever your name is, why is the king delighted to honor Mordecai the Jew here? He exposes an assassination plot. What? I think they're having trouble hearing you, Haman. What? Could you just speak up? The people, they want to know why. I mean, it's kind of your role here. Because he exposed an assassination plot and he selflessly risked his life to save the king. There we go. Oh, wow. Hail Mordecai the Jew for saving our king. Long live the king. And you just got to think, how many times did they have to have the exact same excruciating for Haman conversation? However many it was, mercifully for Haman, at some point this thing ends and there's time between the end of the parade and the beginning of the banquet for him to go and wipe the poop off his shoes and try to recover some dignity. So let's see what they both go and do when it's all over. Esther 6, verse 12. Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate. Oh, so he just went back to doing what he was doing anyway. He just like sitting at the king's gate, as long as old men sit and talk about the weather, I guess. But Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief and told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. It is really funny how these royal officials and the king himself are so quick to go tell people about their most embarrassing moments. Maybe they just never went to enough parties to practice the dance steps of what you're supposed to do when somebody leads with that icebreaker. You don't go with the actual most embarrassing moment, guys. You go with something real harmless or that maybe even makes you look kind of cool and approachable. You don't call a party and tell everybody that you just got completely shamed in front of the whole city. I don't know. Life lessons are hard to come by, I suppose. We'll break down a little bit more about the fallout from the parade and what both parties go and do and how they respond to this thing next time around. Hey, quick note, I made a really cool map of the Achaemenid dynasty during the era that we're talking about, this era of Persia. I think it looks super, super slick. It's mega high res, so you can print it out or pinch zoom and get a really good look at it. I mean, it's very, very thorough, gives you great coverage of everything. I thought it would be a fun resource to tag on to what we're doing here, kind of like the way when you read the Chronicles of Narnia or the Lord of the Rings stuff, you always like to flip back and forth to the maps to stay oriented to where you are. And we've bounced around the ancient world quite a bit in the 100 and some episodes that we've been talking about this era. So I thought the map could be a really cool thing. I paid a talented person to help me make it, and I think they did a phenomenal job. And a little later on next week, I'm going to start distributing digital copies of that to everybody who supports at any level in any way. So if you'd like to learn more about supporting the program, you can go to thetmbh.com/support or patreon.com/thetmbh podcast. It's all below in the show notes. Thanks to everybody who does support the program. Thanks to everybody who doesn't. I'm just glad we get to do this stuff. And I'm really excited next week to put that map in front of those of you who are helping to make this thing go. All right. Thanks, everybody. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.